I'm Greg. I make the Bowclamp. I'm not sure. A lot of people are familiar with it. I'm going to assume you're not. We'll start from the beginning. If I can get this out of here. Okay. Bowclamp is a clamping caul designed to clamp 4 feet using a clamp only one clamp at each end, while giving me equal pressure all the way across. I use CNC technology and cut a computer-generated bow-shaped arc on the face. It's basically a bridge section, right? When the engineers build a bridge, they build it with an arc in the top. Tractor trailers have the same arc, knowing that the weight of the load is going to flatten it out. So we figured, well, how much pressure do we normally apply as cabinet makers, carpenters, get 2 pieces of wood to mate and the glue to squeeze out? And then I designed the curve based on, if I flip it upside down, I want to clamp flat to the table, let's say. How much pressure is going to take on the ends to get the Bowclamp to lay down flat against the workpiece or the table and distribute pressure equally from one end to the other. For an example, something we do every day, you guys, cabinet makers, carpenters, right? Hardwood edge to a plywood shelf. It could be a face frame of a cabinet, right? If you were going to do a face frame, I was like to say a carpenter would nail it, right? And a cabinet maker would glue it and clamp it. That's pretty much the difference between a carpenter and a cabinet maker, at least in my eyes, is how many clamps do you own. In fact, the house I'm staying in this week has beautiful pine cabinets with a face frame, and it's as though we all agreed to pretend that we don't see the putty in the holes. You know? But for me, it stands out like a sore thumb, because if you had more clamps, we wouldn't be puttying holes, we would be gluing it and clamping it. So the Bowclamp, 1 clamp on either end, across 4 feet, will flatten against the workpiece and give me equal pressure and glue squeeze out from one end to the other. So instead of using 8, 10, or 12 clamps over 4 feet, I can use 1 clamp at each end and get equal pressure. And it's accurate enough if this were a veneer edge. The industry standard, right, if you guys iron-on, hot melt glue, it's a visible glue line. It's not that great of a bond. You walk past those cabinets and your jeans catch the corner and it rips the veneer right off. Well, with Bowclamps, you can glue that with yellow glue. It's a permanent bond. It's as strong as a bond that put your plywood together. That's not, the veneer edge will come off when your plywood delaminates. So they come in 2 foot, 3 foot, and 4 foot lengths. And they're useful for all sorts of projects in the workshop, and we'll try a bunch of different glue-ups. Let me back up here for a second. So the face has the curve, and the logo shows the curved side as well as marks the center. The back, there's a T-slot. And what the T-slot is for allows both the head of the clamp as well as the pad of the clamp to fit into the T-slot. Now it's adjustable for any size workpiece. More importantly, as the Bowclamp comes under pressure and wants to spring off, it's locked in place and has nowhere to go. They could be used in opposing pairs if I had, let's say, a lamination to do. And we'll do some quick glue-ups. I'm just going to grab some scrap. I'm really not that well prepared, but that was sort of part of my plan, was to be able to just grab some pieces here and do some glue-ups, a bunch of different kinds. Let's say a lamination. Guitar neck. I know a lot of luthiers like Bowclamps for laying down the fretboard, equal pressure all the way across. If I wanted to say glue these 3 pieces together, right? If I need an 1.5 inch piece, I only have 1/2 inch material. It could be a panel glue up on edge. We'll do that one as well. But we'll start with a lamination. Let's assume I slather some glue and I want to create 3 pieces. I can put it in between Bowclamps. I can use like 3-footers for a 3-foot piece. I can also use the 4-footers. Works with any size up to 4 feet. But for the moment, right, if I were a cabinet maker, how many clamps would I need? Right? Let's talk about the physics for a second. The clamp pressure is going to radiate from your clamp head, and even if you never even thought about it, in geometry terms, I'm sure your past experience will make sense. It's the same thing with our nail. Right? If I put a nail right here, at what point is there a loss of pressure and I'm not getting any squeeze out? If I was with the clamps, how far do I spread my clamp space? So the pressure radiates from your clamp head through your material at 45 degrees. And I don't actually measure, I just eye it up. But that's how I typically figure how far my clamps will be spaced apart. So the thinner your material is, the closer your clamps are going to be. Right? If this were, let's say if I was going to stand this piece on edge, and I put my clamp here, my clamp pressure is going to radiate from 45 degrees through the material. I come back at 45 degrees, and that tells me where my next clamp needs to be. Right? If this were a taller piece, right, the taller, the thicker you go, the more material you have for the pressure to radiate, therefore your clamps can be further apart. The thinner the material you go, the closer your clamps need to be together. Right? If it were veneer edge, you couldn't get your clamps right, close enough together to be able to get your hands to turn the handles to get some pressure. So, iron-on glue, in my opinion, was only ever created because there was no way to spread the clamping pressure. You wouldn't trust it anywhere else in your woodworking. It's pretty much only for edge banding. And if you want to do, curly maple, whatever, some veneer where you can't buy an edge tape and you're making your own, you're not going to be able to get it with a hot melt glue, and you have to, contact cement is basically the same. As soon as it heats up a little bit, it starts skating around, and the same thing where I've done tons of repairs on edge banding. Whether it was done with a commercial edge bander or whether it was done, the commercial edge banders, I had one that had a Holzer 1404. I spent $12,500 on it. It was 20 years old when I bought it. It's a giant hot melt glue gun. It's still a hot melt. It had the trimmers, top, bottom, front and back, but it was basically a hot melt glue gun. Pellets. It's a visible glue line. If you're doing cherry, mahogany, anything dark, there's that white line. And then the actual glue itself, you can always feel it in your finish. So I like to do it with, real veneer. A lot of times veneer gets a bad name, but I believe, engineered materials were engineered for a reason. You don't always want, you can't build every cabinet side out of solid material for movement purposes. So, plywood has its place in the shop. MDF, same thing. I wouldn't use it for a cabinet side, but for countertops, tabletops, nothing's flat. As long as it's not going to get wet, like people think, oh, MDF is cheap. It has its places as long as it's used properly. So, anyway, back to Bowclamps. The fact that the engineered materials are flat makes my life easier. Right? If there's any waves in here, with Bowclamps, we're sort of assuming that everything is going to be flat and true. And as long as it is, it's going to be great. The reason why you can't just take a block plane to a 2x4 and everybody's tried, I assume, well, maybe not everybody. I spent years making my own calls, and they were always imperfect at best. They would help to get some pressure out there in the middle, some spots along the way. Typically, it was more of a taper than an arc. And what it would do, when you flatten it, it basically did this. And you get pressure in the middle, and you get pressure on the ends, but the space in between, there was nothing happening. If that was veneer, it would never work. You need pressure everywhere. So that's where the CNC technology came in, was to be able to cut, quote unquote, the perfect curve. And then with the T-slot, removing the fumbling, it suddenly became a tool. Now it became useful. All the reasons why it didn't work before, now it can work. So, let me get back to my lamination. Now we have a basic understanding of how the pressure gets dispersed. Right, so back to my inch and a half lamination, if I have a clamp here, where's my next clamp going to be? So I'm figuring, really my material to the glue line is only a half of an inch. So I need clamps or nails or whatever your method is, right, every couple of inches, over 3 feet, let's count it. Maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, probably be even a little bit more. Every clamp in the shop. If this were a face frame on a cabinet, if you have, let's say, a 3-foot base cabinet, that's 10, 12 linear feet of clamping. If you had a clamp every 6 inches, 10 clamps per side, that's 40 clamps. Do you even have 40 clamps in your shop to glue up the face frame of one cabinet? When I was a cabinet maker, I'd be building a kitchen. I had 40 clamps, give or take, right? My standard routine was I would glue up one face frame in the morning and go eat lunch and come back in the afternoon and glue up another one. So that would take me basically a week to glue up the face frames in the kitchen. Most of the time the glue is spent setting, but my clamps are being used. Now with the same 40 clamps, I can do the bases in the morning and the uppers in the afternoon. And that's the difference between a kitchen a day and a kitchen a week.
Fast drying glue.
What's that?
Fast drying glue.
The glue dries fast enough already. I don't think,
15 minutes.
Well, yeah. Well, 40. How many? You can't get 40 clamps on a cabinet before your glue is drying. That's the other thing. It's always a race against time. Well, that's why.
I know this will speed up the process. Though.
Right. So now it's one clamp per side. Let's assume there's a center divider on that cabinet. There's no way to get clamping pressure out in the middle of the center divider. You have to leave the back off to get some clamps on the center. Well, now you can string a Bowclamp across the face and clamp the center divider as well. Yeah, that would always screw up your finishing schedule, right? You leave the back off of one cabinet, the one with the center divider. And also for carcass assembly, while we're at it, right? If we have a cabinet side, let's say this is our cabinet side, and we have a center shelf. I would say biscuited on, but dominoed. I'm just going to want to insult anything. You can get a clamp on the front, you can get a clamp on the back, but how to get a clamp out in the middle, right? And here's the irony, is you're always going to grab a piece of scrap from your scrap bin anyway to use as a call between your clamp head and the workpiece, because you don't want to mar the workpiece. So now I would always save pieces of scrap that I knew would work as a good call later on. And my shop was a mess, because I had little pieces laying around everywhere. I had a special bin, right? And they were never quite the right length, and I'd have to go cut something. Well, now I go to my clamp rack, my bow clamps are hanging next to my clamps, I grab 2 clamps and a bow clamp and I'm ready to glue up that side. I get equal pressure all the way across, and I said I was going to use a call anyway. So all that time spent looking for that right piece of scrap, now the scrap goes in the scrap pile or the burn pile, and your shop is neater and you're saving time. And it's nice and consistent where I can use a 2-foot bow clamp and a clamp on either end. And get equal pressure all the way across. I could use a 3-footer and it would work equally as well. My clamp is going to attach into my T-slot, 1 clamp on either end, and equal pressure all the way across. So I'm bouncing around a little bit, but to get back to my lamination, I should really clear the bench. This is a little bit fast, isn't it? I can use 2 opposing bow clamps. I can adjust the pressure easily enough. Make sure my leather strap is out of the way. A little bit of pressure now, it's pinched here in the center. Now I'm going to jump off on another tangent, something that we always take for granted when we're using clamps every couple of inches or so. Typically the way I would do this, if I wasn't using bow clamps, I would clamp one end, I would clamp the other end, and I come to the middle, and I split the difference, and I split the difference again, and I keep splitting the difference until I either have clamping pressure everywhere, or I run out of clamps. But what happens is, I clamp both ends, and then I clamp the middle. Some people might start from one end and work their way down. And that would actually be smarter, because what happens is, and you've had this happen a million times, you're setting that last clamp, and all of a sudden the one board starts skating up on you. And now you're fighting with it to keep everything aligned. An added bonus of the bow clamp method that you sort of stumble across accidentally is when the pressure starts in the center and works its way out towards either end, the boards don't skate around. They just cooperate and lay flat. It's that what happens is you've trapped the glue. I pinch the ends tight, and now I squeeze the center. The glue needs an exit path, but you've restricted that exit path, so now it's fighting for a way to get out, and that's when those boards start skating around. Then you start looking for ways to clamp everything flat, right? You've had top and bottom calls to keep everything aligned. So that's just a little bit added bonus So when I'm happy with the alignment, top and bottom, left and right, all I do is clamp both ends tight. And when the glue squeezes out on the end, I come down to the other side, clamp that down as well, and now I have equal pressure, equal glue squeeze out all the way across. I can set this aside to dry and get on to my next project. If I have a flat, rigid table, I don't need the second set of opposing Bowclamp, the second opposing Bowclamp. I can just clamp flat to my table. It works great with the Festool clamps. They fit right in the end. Same thing, I can adjust the pressure, double check my alignment. When I'm happy with the alignment, clamp the ends down tight. Now, how many people have a veneer press, a vacuum pump for doing veneer work? A dedicated machine, you won't have another use for it in the shop, but I could use, bow clamps in series. And again, continuing with our 45-degree rule, that's how I determine my spacing between the bow clamps. And if I wanted to spread my bow clamps a little further, I just add a couple layers of MDF platens to build it up thicker. The thicker I go, the more room, right? The bow clamp, if I'm coming this way, the 45-degree rule through the clamp head, through the material. So if I have, let's say, 4 layers of 3/4 MDF, that's going to give me 3 inches on either side to the next bow clamp. So then I can go, right, 3 inches and 3 inches back. So my bow clamps can be spaced 6 inches apart. So on my MFT, suddenly if you have, say, 4 bow clamps, 4 4-footers in your shop, now you have a 2-foot by 4-foot veneer press with 8 clamps that you most likely already own. Vacuum pumps are great if you're going to do a full sheet, 4x8. That's beyond, price-wise, but typically you're going to be buying that already laid out for you anyway. Smaller projects, I just saw Popular Woodworking had a blog post about a veneer press the guy's making. He's, this big, he wants like $600 for it with a big. Anybody catch that post? Bob Lang. $600. I can't get my tabletop in that little thing, right? But you take your bow clamp to your project, you can glue it up anywhere. So, tons of uses in a wood shop. I'm trying to think of some others. Veneer work, marquetry, inlay.
If you're doing a 5-foot mantle, I always glue up my stock for an 1.5-inch mantle. If I don't have material, would you get 24 inches as small as you make?
I've gone smaller. I made it
because you'd have to pretty much.
5 feet. You can use a 2-footer and a 3-footer with 4 clamps.
But you got to worry about the center, and if it's 9 inches wide, you need something in the center to glue it together. So right now it takes about 30 clamps.
For
bringing two pieces of 3/4.
Sure.
5 feet long. More than 30 clamps.
I think if you had a pair of 2s and a pair of 3s and 8 clamps.
Let's think about going along the long way, to get the. Because if you got 9-inch piece, you're going to need 3 pieces. You can't join 2 of them in the center, unless you have a deep throat clamp with a block on it.
I've also done. This is actually a neat trick where I've done. I have pictures of all this on my computer. I made a veneer press with 4 4-footers this way. It was a 2-foot by 4-foot veneer press. So I had 4 4-footers, but instead of using 8 clamps, I used 2 2-footers on the ends perpendicular to flatten the bow clamp. So then I only need 4 clamps, 1 on each corner. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I have a press full size of this table.
Right.
And it's, you know, pressed down faster than the vacuum will evacuate the air from the bag. You know, and it's always a race against time. Your glue is kicking. You don't get a second shot at it, right? They're wax coated, I should mention, so the glue doesn't stick. You don't have to worry about you know, glue squeeze out, dry glue flakes right off. And I treat it like a cutting board, which every 6 months or so you would recoat. It's the same thing. I keep wax in my shop. My joiner bed gets waxed. Wax your planer bed. It'll thank you. You'll hear the motor and say, ah, you know, that reduced friction. But it also seals the pores of the wood and keeps the glue from sticking. So when you glue, dry glue, I wax my bench, same thing. So I don't have to worry about. I see a lot of guys mess around with, you know, wax paper and cellophane. I just put a nice coat of wax on my bench, keep it waxed every couple months or so, a fresh coat, and when the glue dries, you know, planer blade, and it flakes right off. Questions? We can try a couple other glue-ups, panel glue-ups on edge, work well, carcass assembly, on veneer work.
How would you apply like a face frame that's like unequal width? So you got a 3/4 inch plywood carcass side, and then you're going to apply like 1.5 inch nosing to it.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to keep that from like essentially rolling over and opening up on one side when you really jam on a clamp? You know what I'm saying? Where all of a sudden you got so much clamp pressure applied that it's no longer, you're pulling out a square to the face.
Well, everything should always be lined up along the center
To
line.
keep it from pulling.
Lined up.
I
Wow.
mean, if this is my face frame, as long as my clamp center line, right, regardless of where this is,
Yeah.
okay, it's off to one side or if it's in the center, as long as the center of my clamp
Face.
is along the center line of the workpiece, it'll just clamp square.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I'm just talking about because you're gonna have to. Should you have to align the blow clamp center to that then?
Yes.
Obviously.
Yeah,
But that's
exactly.
gonna apply center pressure.
Right. So I always start with light pressure, so it's just pinched in the center, and again, that's when I can double check my alignment. Everything's got to be square. Again, yeah, because exactly as you're saying, if it's not square,
Yeah, you're gonna pull it.
it's going to pop right off.
Yeah.
But as long as everything is square, when I say square, I mean really centered along the, you know, the center of the clamp, centered along the workpiece. And I can try. We'll do a couple glue ups. We'll get rid of my mess.
You guys have everything.
Like if I went, let's say, back to the first glue up, we did our lamination. Right? Oh, I should mention pipe clamps, K-bodies. Well, they don't utilize the T-slot. Fits right over the back and works equally as well. I like these with the feet. So it doesn't utilize a T-slot, but it fits right over the back, works equally as well. If I want to, say, headband my plywood shelf, shelf, and you know, shorter bench, or longer bench. This way. So let's say, let's assume my bench were 2 inches longer and my workpiece was 2 inches shorter. So
I need a 4-foot bench.
you may want to stand up and come closer so you can see what's happening. What I'm going to try and do is get, you know, equal amount of space on either side. I snug this up, right? One turn. Now you see how it's pinched in the center. I can reduce the pressure. That way I can double check my alignment. Now, same thing we were talking about the center line before, right? I'm going to want to center this. I'm going to put a little bit of pressure on it. So you see now it's snug. If I need to flush up my end, I can back off the pressure, slide that over. if it's a miter you want to line up, right? You can really, it's pinched now in the center, so right, a little bit more pressure, a little bit less pressure, depending on need. Get that lined up exactly where you want it. Now it's not going to move anywhere, but what I'm going to need to do, and actually it'll work fine with these clamps. Everything's laying flat against the clamp. For an F clamp, the same centering we were talking about along the center line of a clamp, if I was this way, I would need to make sure that my center line, camera's on this side I should show, that the center line here would be lined up with my panel. So all I would then need to do, I can either add a couple shims. If I'm working with 1/2 inch, I know a 1/2 inch shim would work underneath. But after about 2 or 3 times using it, you realize you don't need the shims, you realize just a little bit of pressure. Now I can just sort of scooch everything into the center where I need it, right? A little bit more pressure. Right? Once I know everything's lined up, right? I'm happy top and bottom, left and right, then all I do is clamp down until it's tight on both ends. No need to go back to the clamp rack, right? 6 more times for 12 more clamps. There's equal pressure all the way across, as will be attested by the evidence by the glue squeeze out. I can take this, set it off to the side. You know, if I had, let's say 6 shelves to do, I would have to do, right, 2, 3, 10 clamps, 30 clamps in the shop, 2 runs, all 6 shelves in less time. So I like to say it's better, it's faster, and it's cheaper. It's better because instead of having pressure where you can afford to have pressure, we have equal pressure everywhere. It's faster, clearly, than setting all of those clamps, and it's cheaper than having to buy all those clamps in the first place. So it's going to open up tons of possibilities for you, free up your clamps, save you time and money. Questions?
How much it cost?
Oh, sure. So I make 2 footers, 2 footers, 3 footers, and 4 footers. They're 25, 35, and 45 each. If you buy a pair, it saves $5. If you buy the 6-piece set, a pair of each size saves another $5 per pair. So a $30 savings over the individual charge. So the master set, 6 pieces, is $179.99. What did I miss? Laminations, face frames, cabinet assembly, veneer press, marquetry, inlay. I'm sure there are others.
Is there anything you need to clamp?
So, yeah, fixturing. Sometimes you just need pressure out there in the middle of the workpiece. And how do you get pressure out there in the middle? But it'll give pressure not just in the middle, but everywhere it contacts
And
the
you get those
workpiece.
cabinets where you can't get a clamp in the center of it.
Right.
Exactly.
Usually what I do now is I'll just put a shim in there and then clamp down both sides so you don't get equal pressure.
Exactly. That's exactly what I did with my first homemade ones. It didn't really work, and I would add a shim. But here's the problem. Now I'm getting pressure where the clamp is and where the shim is, but I'd add another shim over here next to it, but what happens is it loosens up the first shim.
Right.
So you're really only ever getting pressure, on the ends where the clamps are, and maybe 1 or 2 spots along the way. And it's frustrating. So, I made these first for myself. I happened to get lucky. One of the finest veneer craftsmen in the world happened to be walking by my shop, and he saw them, and his jaw hit the floor, and said, "I want 6 dozen of those things in my shop." And then I was in. That's how I started, and then I was in business. So feel free to play around with them, ask some questions. We can try a couple other glue ups if you want a cabinet side or panel press. Let's do that. How do you make? I see this one all the time. You need an 1.5 inch panel. You can't buy 1.5 inch plywood. Right? How do I join these two together? Right? Done all the time. You need a vacuum pump, right? If you had clamps, you can get clamps on the edges. Oh, there's some nice veneer tape. Ironed on. I can pull that right off. Couple bow clamps on top. Clamp flat down to your bench. Again, if this were a sheet of veneer or a marquetry, done all in one shot. Right? A couple sheet clamps that you already own. Works great. I showed you the Festool clamps fit. Both ends work for clamping down to the table. K-bodies work the same as the pipe clamps. Virtually every clamp on the market. There's some of the deep jaw clamps that don't fit into the slot, but they would fit right over the back.